PMM on Lightroom, and I'm going to be talking today a little bit about Lightroom. I think what's really important for us on the Lightroom team is making sure that there's clarity between the two different Lightroom ecosystems, because that's extremely confusing for people. And having you guys understand this all would be really helpful for us, because the more clear we can be with this message, the better across the board. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the two Lightroom ecosystems to start with. Just to cover this really quickly, it's a very short keynote, but it goes over some of the main differences between the two different Lightroom ecosystems. So if you guys aren't familiar, Lightroom Classic came out back in 2006, so it's been around for a while. It's not a new program for us, but 2 years ago we released a new program, but the confusing thing is that it's also called Lightroom, and when we released it, it was called Lightroom CC. So the differences between the two ecosystems is mostly on like the back end in terms of where things are being stored and how you might use them on different devices. But essentially, we want people to pick early in their journey which product they're going to be using. They're two different products, even though they're both Lightroom. They both look like Lightroom. They both work in roughly the same way with the editing tools and the sliders that are available. So let me talk a little bit about what the differences are, because it's really important that people understand the differences. And it's, I know that especially with students, I've been talking to the different educational teams and figuring out what kinds of plans are available for students. So I'm not sure if you guys know which of the Lightroom ecosystems most students are using, but let me talk about them and you guys can give me some feedback if you at the end, if that makes sense. So there are two different Lightroom ecosystems, two different programs, so you can literally have these two standalone icons on your desktop that run entirely separately. They can be open at the same time or one at a time. Lightroom Classic, the one that's been around for a while, is on the left. It is distinguishable by the sharp corners on the square. It's like I said, very confusing because the icons are virtually the same. But we kind of refer to them sometimes as just, to differentiate them as like square corner versus rounded corners. So pay attention to those when you're working with people and they're asking for advice on the two different programs. Because the one that's been around for a while is Lightroom Classic. That's the one that is entirely desktop-based or computer-based only. So it's not really meant to be synced with other devices. It's not meant for cloud storage. It's really just, I have my home computer. I have an external hard drive or internal hard drive or whatever server at home where I store all of my files, and whenever I'm working on them, I'm at home accessing them. So because it is very desktop centric, you are responsible for your own file backups, and it's not really intended for people who want and need a more mobile workflow. The reason we introduced a new ecosystem is because we kind of recognize that mobile is the way of the future, right? So many of us are working across different devices. We are not tied to our home computers. We're traveling a lot. And cloud storage is getting cheaper and cheaper and more accessible and more trusted. So we think that what the future needs is this new Lightroom ecosystem. However, we are still supporting and will continue to support this old ecosystem, Lightroom Classic. Lightroom Classic right now has slightly more robust features than the new Lightroom ecosystem. However, pretty much everything that one would need to do in Lightroom, you can do in either Lightroom program. So that's really important to remember. So I'll go over in a little bit some of the things that are available in the new Lightroom ecosystem, but you'll see that there are things that most people don't necessarily need. So the new Lightroom ecosystem is on the right. It's the cloud-based version. When we first released it, it was called Lightroom CC. We just dropped recently the CC from the name of all the programs. So right now it's Lightroom Classic versus Lightroom. So that's confusing as well. Yet another thing in the naming that is confusing to people. So we just really want people to know that, check the icons. Sometimes we refer to the new Lightroom as Lightroom Cloud, even though that's not an official name, or cloud-based Lightroom, or even Lightroom Rounded Corners, which is, not a very professional sounding name, but it conveys the differences between the two. So cloud-based Lightroom is the Lightroom that includes, Lightroom Mobile on your phone or on your tablet or on your desktop, just like the Lightroom Classic standalone app. Lightroom Cloud-based has a standalone desktop app. It's also accessible on the web, so if you go to lightroom.adobe.com, you can log in with your Adobe credentials and you will get anything that you've imported into Lightroom is synced across all devices. So it's available whether or not you have your phone with you. You can go to the public library, log into Lightroom on the web, and all of those photos that you've imported into Lightroom will be there, as well as any edits you've made. So the cool thing about it is that you can import your full res raw files, and then they are uploaded into the cloud. You do have to be a subscriber to access the premium features, which are like some of the more advanced features like selective adjust or spot cloning and healing, as well as the syncing. So you have to be a subscriber to have access to the syncing. But what it will do is upload all your full res raw files into the cloud so they are available no matter where you are. So right now, for example, I'm a photographer who has been using Lightroom Classic for a very long time. So most of my files are at home on my external hard drives that stay at home because I don't want to carry them with me all the time. But I'm here in New York for 3 weeks. If I have a client who says, hey, can you send me, we want to license the high-res version of this photo that you took during this shoot 3 months ago or 6 months ago or a year ago. Can you send us that file? Because if I was still only classic-based, I would basically be out of luck because I would say, well, I actually can't access that high-res file until I go back home, back to those external hard drives, plug in, and then pull those high-res files. If I had everything stored in the cloud with the new Lightroom ecosystem, no matter where I am, even though I'm in New York, without my home computer, I can still pull that high-res file and send it to the client in that particular situation. So there are a lot of good use case scenarios for it, kind of depending on what you're. Right now, Lightroom Classic, the one on the left, has it has more comprehensive tools in terms of like organization, so like hierarchical keywording and stuff like that. So if you're somebody who likes to do that sort of thing, that availability is not on Lightroom cloud-based. You can keyword, but not hierarchically. But what it does have is Adobe Sensei technology. So the search capabilities work very differently than they would in Lightroom Classic. Lightroom Classic, right now, you're searching basically your metadata on your image file, or you're searching for keywords that you yourself have given to the image. So as somebody like me who is really honestly just too lazy about keywording everything, my search capabilities within Lightroom Classic are very limited. But if I wanted to search within the new cloud-based Lightroom, it's using Adobe Sensei, so it's machine learning, and it basically intelligently scans the files and kind of knows what's in them. So I can show you that in a minute, but basically I can search for any word, having never keyworded anything, and it'll scan the images and know roughly what's in them and give you some pretty robust results. So to move forward, some of the benefits of Lightroom, and this is Lightroom Cloud-based, the newer ecosystem. I mean, we do want to push people towards the newer ecosystem, and this is where I'd love some of your feedback as well, because I know that there are some questions about how possible it is, how useful, how feasible it is for students to actually be using the new cloud-based ecosystem, given the fact that storage is limited in your typical student plans. So I'd love to, at the end of this piece, stop and take some of your feedback on that. But for now, some of the benefits of the new cloud-based ecosystem, of course, is that the storage is cloud-based, so you're not tied to any home machine, and you're not tied to you're not limited to only being able to access those files when you're at your home computer. You can sync across your devices. You can access those full res originals from anywhere. Sorry, I went really quickly there. But the new Lightroom ecosystem does not have output modules and a map. So those of you who are using Lightroom Classic are probably familiar with the layout of the screen, which basically at the top on the right side, you see different output modules. So you'll see your library, develop, print, slideshow, people, whatever else on the top right. So the new Lightroom ecosystem does not have those different output modules. It's essentially like only library and only develop, basically all kind of mushed together, which is where everyone spends like 99% of their time there anyway. So that remaining 1% of time is maybe in this like, I need to print module, or I'm going to make a book and I need to do a layout module. So those output modules are not there. The map feature is not there. Like I mentioned earlier, no hierarchical keywording or smart collections. What we have instead in the new Lightroom ecosystem is albums and folders, which you can also sort of stack as you need to. But the keywording is sort of one layer, so no hierarchical keywording, but we have keywording. Right now, batch processing. So if you're familiar again with Lightroom, one of the beauties of it is that you can edit one photo in one way. It looks wonderful. Copy all those edits and then select 100 other photos and paste those same edits right onto it. It's a feature that we absolutely want on the new Lightroom. Right now it's unfolding sort of like piecemeal because it's all these different teams working on, say, Lightroom for mobile, Lightroom for desktop, Lightroom for web. So right now it's available on Android phones, and I think by Adobe Max in November it'll be available on iPhones. And I think web as well. So if it's not there now, it's about to be there. And right now, the new Lightroom also has limited export options. So if you're familiar with Lightroom Classic, you have all these different export options where you can select your size and you can rename it and do all these different things. And right now it's pretty limited. Basically, like, do you want to export as small for web or large full res? So we are making that more robust as well, but right now it's still fairly limited. And in terms of editing tools, like I mentioned, there's virtual feature parity in terms of the specific tools that are available, and what we want is for there to be full parity. But right now, one of the main things that's missing is color and luminance range masking, which honestly, like saying that here, I bet like most photographers I know don't even know what that is and would never use that feature. So it's not like lacking that feature in the new Lightroom is really affecting that many people. Most people don't even realize it's not even there. So we do hope that comes in the future. There's plans for it to come in the future. I'm not sure exactly when. But when I first created this short deck, there were like 3 different things that I listed here, and basically each time I give this presentation, I have to take one off because we just keep adding features. Because the new Lightroom ecosystem is new, we are like pouring a lot of resources, like a lot of time and resources on it because we really want to get it up to par. So that's why there are new things coming all the time, and it's kind of hard to keep on top of. So one of the things that I am reminded of every time I teach Lightroom, and I always like to mention to people, is that it doesn't always make sense for a product to be 100% done before we release it. I mean, Lightroom is done; it works. It does like most of the things that we want it to do, and just in terms of like features, some features that we don't quite have yet, it doesn't make sense to wait till they're all there before we release it because that can take a really long time sometimes. So the example I give is when Lightroom Classic was first released, it didn't even have a crop tool. It was still sort of in development as well. So it happens all the time that products are released where they just keep adding to them. So that's absolutely the case with Lightroom Cloud-based right now. So right now, Classic, which is the square-cornered version of Lightroom, is only on your desktop. And Cloud-based Lightroom, the newer ecosystem right now, is also on the desktop. Like I said, it's a standalone app that lives separately, so you can literally have your little dock at the bottom if you're on a Mac and have the 2 icons sitting side by side. So it's really important to know and be able to differentiate between those 2 icons because it can be confusing in that way. And then it's also on the web, And it's also on mobile, so iPhone, iPad, or phone, tablet, depending on what you find yourself using. So the cool thing about it is that all the Lightroom Cloud-based syncs across all of these different surfaces. So I can literally bounce from like device to device to device, and everything that I've imported into one shows up on the other, as well as my edits. I mean, it's as long as the Wi-Fi or your connection is working. What I do in my demos oftentimes is I edit a photo on my phone, and then I look at it at the same time. I refresh on my laptop, and boom, like that black and white edit that I did on my phone is there on my computer. So it's really cool in that way. And again, you do need to be a subscriber for that, but most students are. So this is something that's available to all students. It's just a matter of that storage space. So we can talk about that. The confusing thing here is that Classic and Lightroom also sync, but only sort of. So if you are a Classic user and you want to stay a Classic user for whatever reason, or you can still use Lightroom Mobile. You can still take advantage of some of the syncing features. They just work a little bit differently than they would if you were solely in the Lightroom cloud-based ecosystem. And the limitations of that like Classic to Lightroom sync are that you can only sync one catalog at a time, which works for most people. So most people have one catalog that they have all of their images in. I do a new catalog per year. I don't know, that's just like a holdover of my old workflow that I've been using for years and years. So when I update to a new year, I have to specify which catalog I want it to sync. But most people are only in one catalog, so it's totally fine. Another limitation is that once you do sync that one catalog, you have to manually sync individual collections. And it's a limitation for a reason, right? Because a lot of people have thousands and thousands or hundreds of thousands of photos in Lightroom Classic because they've been using it for a very long time. So we understand that there are cloud limitations for everybody. So we don't want hundreds of thousands of photos to be immediately synced to your phone or whatever. So we make it so that you have to specify you have to make a collection, first of all, if you don't have one made, and then specify that that's the one collection you want to sync with the new Lightroom ecosystem. So basically, you can have this collection on your phone, and then, like, say you went out and did a big shoot for a company, like a shoe brand or something like that, and you have all of the shoots, all of the photos, that you shot during this shoot. Your Classic base, you put them all on your hard drive at home, import them into Classic, but then you're like, I'm going to be gone from home for 3 days, but I still want to work on them, but I'm not going to bring my laptop. What you can do is put all of those photos from the shoot into a collection, sync that with Lightroom on your phone, and then have those images accessible on your phone so that while you're traveling, you can go through and do the culling and flagging and stuff, whatever you want to do. So that's a good use of that sort of Classic to Lightroom sync. But what's really important to remember with this particular sync is that you're limited to smart preview sizes. So even if you're doing some culling and even editing on your phone, what you want to do before you export anything and share it to any clients is go back into Classic and export from there. Because on your phone, with this particular sync, you don't have the full res files. So that's a really important piece to remember with this Classic to new Lightroom sync. And remember, if you're in new Lightroom only and only syncing among the new Lightroom ecosystem products, then you do have full res files, so you're not faced with the same limitation. But that's really important to know. I think that's the last piece of that conversation. So this is Lightroom cloud-based. So these are some of the photos. I'm here in New York for Photoville, and I was just doing a photo walk yesterday. So some photos I took during the walk with my students. Let me just I want to orient you to Lightroom cloud-based. Does anybody use Lightroom Classic right now? Okay. Does anybody use the new Lightroom cloud-based already? Okay, so yeah, let me orient you to this because if this is what we are encouraging people to use, it'd be great for you guys to have a good handle on how it kind of works. Um, One thing that I do want to mention as well, and because I don't have the hookup for my phone, and again I apologize for that, is in Lightroom Mobile on the phone, um, we recently introduced what we call in-app tutorials and Discover posts. So they are going to be available on Lightroom on desktop and web very soon but if you go to Lightroom Mobile, do you guys have Lightroom Mobile already? Okay. So if you guys are getting into this, or if you're working with somebody who's teaching it, Lightroom Mobile on your phone, and if you're learning it, it's really great for you. It is completely free. I mean, you need an Adobe ID to sign in, um, but you don't have to be a paid subscriber to access these. We have in-app tutorials and Discover posts, and I wanted to show you them, but I can't because my phone's not connected. But um, if you go to, so if you see here on the left side of the screen, I'm pointing at these different icons like sharing, my photos, and add photos. So when you open Lightroom Mobile on your phone, the top navigation bar essentially has these same icons, but it has an additional icon, and it's a home icon. We might change it up soon to make it a little bit more clear that that's where education files or where the education portion of the app is. But you'll see it here too eventually in a few months when we do release it on desktop. But under Home on your phone, what you can do is go through these interactive tutorials that we've created specifically to teach people how to use Lightroom. So right now they're very tools based. So what does the slider do? Why might I use it? What is it actually doing to my photo? And because they're written by actual photographers or actual creators out there, not only do you get a good understanding of what each of the sliders do, but you can see it in action, and then you can go from step 1 to step 10 or 15 or whatever to an end product, a really nicely edited photo. So they just walk you through step by step how to use the app. So for us now, because these tutorials have been in the app for a few months, it's a really great place for us to refer people to. There are a couple hundred already in the app and hundreds more coming. Literally, there's like 200 in the queue right now waiting to be approved and added. They're a really fantastic place to direct people to. So if you guys are teaching classes or if you're working with somebody who's teaching classes on how to use Lightroom, the classes are like an hour long or something like that. So you can always direct people to those in-app tutorials because that kind of takes them through step by step in very extreme detail. It shows them how to actually make these edits on their phone. So I encourage you guys to check that out. If you download Lightroom Mobile, poke around in the home section and see what those are all about. So here we are in desktop. And the icons for navigating are on the left. Generally, default is this library. My photos, it looks like a little library icon. So my photos, all of your photos live there, and you can click through to see, when photos were added. You can sort by date. You can sort by people. So this is just kind of like different people that it just auto finds faces. And it has deleted as well. So now we have a recover from deleted option, which is really handy. So kind of like if you guys are on iPhones, if you delete a photo from your camera roll, it goes away, but it's technically there for another do the same thing now. So you can always recover images if you've deleted them. But typically speaking, your navigation here is under albums. So you can create either an album or a folder. So this is my work login, so I don't have a whole lot of images in here. But what you might do is have a top-level folder, and then when you click into it, you have albums. So you can basically put, I can create a folder called New York. So I can create a folder called New York, and then within that, I can create album called, and have that nestled inside this New York folder. So organizationally, this is how the files are handled within Lightroom. And you can always, so say I shot, on the streets of the West Village yesterday, I can go in, right now it says the album is empty, so I can add photos and just pull from, my camera roll or my desktop, depending on which device I'm on, and import them straight into that album. And once you're in the album, you can kind of view by different, you can sort and view accordingly. You can do your star ratings or your flag labels, depending on what you like. So let's keep it on a grid. So oftentimes I'll just go through, I use keyboard shortcuts a lot, but there's just like G for grid, E for loop, which is this view here. So I might just take my next key and use the key and say, I really like, these first few are not my photos, they're photos that we were using for a competition for Coachella. But say I like this one, I can hit, 1 to give it 1 star, and I can cull my images that way. So I can basically like pick the ones that I like the most and mark them with a star or a flag or whatever. And then later I can say filter by 1 star. So I only want to see the images that I've given 1 star or more to, and then work with just those. So if I get to an image that I like, say I really like this one, when I click on it, you'll see that on the right side, these icons here I'm already kind of in this editing mode. So I didn't have to go into a separate editing module. It's basically already there for me. So this top icon with the sliders is where most of the editing tools sit. The second icon is where your crop and rotate options are. Then you have your healing brush, and I can show you quickly if we have time to use these different brush. So selective adjustments, your linear gradient, radial gradient, and then what's under this. So these are kind of what I was telling you about earlier. Like if you edit one photo in a way that you really like, you can just copy and paste all the editing settings. So I know one of you mentioned that you work a lot in Photoshop. So with Photoshop, it's technically considered destructive editing because you're already applying these changes to your file. But with Lightroom, one of the advantages is that it's considered non-destructive editing. So anything that you do to your file can be undone easily and in any order. So typically when you work in Photoshop, you have your history, and it's like, you did 1 thing, 2 things, 3 things, 4 things, 5 things, 6 things, and it's just a big pile of edits that you've made. And once you've made 10 changes, you want to change number 1, or if you want to go back and undo number 1, that's not possible without undoing 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2 as well. But with Lightroom, you can pop over at any time. So say I make this image brighter as my step 1, I add contrast, I darken my blacks, maybe I want to go down. There's so many tools here that we won't have time to go over today. I want to add adjust my clarity or whatever, and then I say, actually, you know what? Maybe it's a little too bright. So I'm going to go back to my step 1, which was exposure, and just tone it down. So I don't have to go back and undo everything sequentially. I can just build on it and change it at any point, which is really nice. And none of these changes are committed to your actual photo until you export it out of the app. So that's really important to remember. So when you're learning Lightroom and you're playing around with it, it's really, I really encourage you to just start moving sliders anywhere you can and just see what they do, see how your image changes, because you're not going to hurt anything. You can always undo it. You can always just revert back to the original file if you've gone way too far. But it's essential to kind of poke around and play and see what happens. So when you get to your final version that you do like, I think I would still do more to this, but say I like this, on the top right corner here is a little share out button. It's like the out symbol. If you click on that, that gives you the ability to save to. And so that gets the file out of Lightroom, the app. So I can specify where I want it saved, what file type I want it to be. And then, like I mentioned, small size, full size, and now we have custom, but still, like I said, there's not a very robust selection of export options here. But it's important to remember that, say, for example, you're shooting on your phone. There's a Lightroom mobile camera, and I did want to show you that. That's why I was working so hard to try to get my phone connected. But there's a Lightroom mobile camera. So if you shoot on Lightroom mobile using the camera, those files are automatically inside of Lightroom, the app itself. They do not live in your camera roll. So when you go to your native camera roll, you're not going to see the images that you shot inside of Lightroom until you export them out of Lightroom. So if you're working with people who are kind of confused about where their files are going, it's important to know that if it's shot on native, it's in your camera roll. If it's shot within the Lightroom app, it's just within the Lightroom app until you export it. So going down really quickly in the last couple minutes I have.
And you can keep going. You can keep going. I'm just going to need to get out of the room, but I'd rather you go and show all this stuff, and then I could edit the video into a final one. So if you want to go through some of the sliders and you have time, let's do it. If the students, you have to go, I totally understand. But I want to just put together all these different aspects and points into one cohesive video to show people that couldn't join.
Sure.
So just keep going. Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions right now in the last kind of minute or two before if you have to take off?
Could you go over making like presets to be able to apply the changes you make in one photo across to the other photos?
Yeah. That's a great question. And then anybody else have a question? Was that somebody talking?
No, that was my computer.
Okay. All right. So so down at the bottom on the right, we have presets. So these are presets that you guys are kind of probably familiar with. As you hover over them, it'll give you a preview on the main screen, which is kind of cool. If you want, you can create your own presets, or you can download presets. So you see some here that I've downloaded, this Greg Noir. He's a photographer who does a lot of concert photography. So here are some of his presets that I've imported into Lightroom. Then down here are some that I've either created or added. A lot of them are just demo, like this is way crazy, so I wouldn't actually use that. So say for instance, oftentimes I like to start with a preset and then customize it from there. So say I like this turquoise and red one. So essentially when you're applying a preset, it is basically a recipe within Lightroom. The way that it works is that it's a recipe for your sliders. So most sliders will just be at 0 when you start. And then if you apply a preset, so let me reset this photo, reset to original. So this is the weird thing. I think this is a glitch right now. These are not at 0, but let's reset this. Let's reset this to 0, basically. So this is how it should be when you open a file. It should all be at 0. So then when you apply a preset, like say I want to apply this turquoise and red preset, it essentially moves my sliders for me in a certain way. So actually a lot of this is like, because it's color-based, this filter is color-based, it's moving a lot of my color filters or sliders. So what I'm going to do here is use this turquoise and red preset as my base preset. And then what I'm going to do is make some adjustments based on what I think this image needs. I think I'd like, a little bit more exposure, contrast. I'm going to add some clarity. Clarity is mid-tone contrast so that we can get a little bit more definition in the clouds. And then what I might do is, I can do this. I'm going to do a linear gradient pulled down from the corner here. So the gradients mean that I'm only applying an edit to a specific area. So I don't think I want these. So what I want to do here in this top corner, so my gradient is on this top left corner. I'm going to pull down my exposure a little bit so this it's not too bright right there. And then what I'm going to do is actually add a new one. I can just pull in a new gradient on this bottom corner because conversely, this bottom corner is too dark. A little bit better. So I basically make whatever edits I want to make on the image, and then let me open up my presets panel again. And then on the top right, you'll see 3 dots, and it says, one of them says Create Preset. So I'm going to call it Turquoise Red Bright, because I basically took that turquoise red and brightened it. And then you can decide here which of these are basically all of the tools that are available. So you can decide which tool you want included as part of your preset. So one thing that I might do is I might decide to uncheck the linear gradients because I've added these 2 linear gradients on images that might not, I want to apply this preset, but not all images need them. So I might uncheck that. Right now, I'm actually going to keep them because I'm going to just put them on some other images from the same day that might need them. So I'm going to say with gradients. So then I can specify which group I want them in. I just keep it in my default user presets, but I can create a new group if I want. Hit save. And then you'll see that the new preset, Turquoise Red Bright with gradients, is down here on that list. So I can go to the next image. I mean, it's virtually identical, so it's not going to look any different, but I can basically apply that. Or I can select multiples. Hopefully that works on working. Maybe it's not working on desktop yet. Sorry. So the way that it should work is that you can select all 3. That's how batch presets work, or batch edits work. But yeah, you can just apply it on any photo you want. So even go to like this black and white. I think I already edited this one black and white, but I can change it to a black and white. Or sorry, I can change it to my turquoise red bright with gradients. Put it on this one of this floor pattern. So yeah, the presets can be applied anywhere and created in just that way. Does that answer your question? Okay. And then presets can also be synced between Classic and Lightroom. It's not a very smooth, functionality isn't super smooth at the moment, but essentially it's a little bit of a workaround. So I guess it's not quite syncing, they can be imported. So basically, if you have presets in Classic that you really like, you can navigate to that folder, find out where that folder is on your computer, copy them out, and then once you know where they are, or even just reference those ones, that same 3 dots at the top right of presets, you can go in and import presets, navigate to that folder, wherever you've put the presets. Sometimes I just copy them out of the preset folder and paste them on my desktop so they're easy to find. Because once they're imported into Lightroom, cloud-based, they will sync across all my devices. So right now, if I opened Lightroom on my phone, I would see this turquoise red bright with gradient preset that I just created. So any of the classic presets you import into the new Lightroom will be synced across all of your Lightroom devices and accessible. So what I'm going to do is I'll just go through some of the tools so that anybody who watches this has a good idea of what the tools are and what they do. Let me find a photo to look at. Okay. So starting from the top, one thing I wanted to point out is that we have what are called profiles, and it can be confusing, the difference between profiles and presets. So I want to make sure that it's understood how they're different. So profiles are essentially, they kind of look like presets when you click into them, which is what is kind of confusing about them, but they're basically color profiles. They're they're your new zero, they're your new baseline. So unlike the presets, which are basically recipes for moving sliders already, everything that you select, like when you select a profile, everything still remains zero. So it's maybe a good place to start. I think a lot of people tend to ignore the profiles. Kind of depends entirely on your workflow. But and like I said, I think this is really a glitch. This like opening at +15 and -5. I can't remember why exactly it does that. But if we think of this as our baseline, the profiles, any profiles applied, as you can see, like even if I choose Adobe Portrait, for example, the sliders don't move at all from this, this baseline. But Adobe Color is kind of standard. You can decide if you want something else. But from there, kind of scrolling down, we have our different sliders. So exposure is basically, brightness, darkness, overall, global. Contrast, again, how bright are your brights, how dark are your darks. Highlights, how bright are your brights. So you might have a situation like in this photo, for example. Now I've kind of blown out my highlights. I might want to lower them a little, so it'll bring back some of the details. See, if I go all the way down, yeah, actually, so highlights generally you take down because you want to recover blown highlights. So if I take it all the way down, you'll see that I get a little bit more detail back into my clouds. But this is a pretty extreme example. Usually you don't go 100 on any slider. You want to be a little bit more subtle about it. But because this one was kind of so wild, yeah, maybe it'll work. It's fine. Whites might give you that same effect. It'll just take down your whites a little. So sometimes highlights and whites work really well in conjunction with one another. Shadows are basically your midtones. So you want to brighten kind of some of the darker areas without losing your blacks. Generally with shadows, you want to go up. But it depends on you and what it is that you're editing. For this one, honestly, it was kind of overexposed anyway with my weird edit on it. So maybe I want to go down. And then blacks are your solid blacks. So, you can see that I can take blacks down and shadows up. So I get solid blacks in my image, but then I have detail in my shadows. So again, those are tools all of these tools I encourage you to play with. With any slider in Lightroom, a double click on the little dot will reset it to 0. So it's a quick reset if you ever need to do that. And remember, double click on it. These little tools here are kind of hidden, so it's really important to point them out. So, oh yeah, it was actually already displayed, sorry. So when you click on this little curve tool, you'll get your different tone curves. You can have your sort of global curve adjustment. So this is like input and output values for a photo. Then you'll get your point curves. You can drop little dots depending on how you want to edit. Some people are very curves-based editors. I'm not, but essentially, the standard S curve I just did here is a curve that's known for basically adding more contrast into an image. But you can also just use a contrast slider. As with Photoshop, there are any number of ways to accomplish the same results. So if you find yourself not as comfortable with curves, don't use them. If you find that you love them, they're here for you. So likewise, these are the color curves. So you have your red, green, and blue curves, so you can adjust any of your colors in that same way. And you can get some. I'm not good with curves, so I'm like, it's really terrible for me to be demoing curves. But you can see what they do: red, green, blue. Yeah, you get your hue, saturation, and luminance curves as well if you'd like to adjust that. Oh, that's your color mixer. I'm sorry. So by clicking on that, I opened up the color mixer. Let's go back really quickly. Let me, in fact, reset this because now I've gone too crazy. Reset to original. So the light panel is what I just showed you. These main sliders and then the curves. I'm going to close that just to get it out of the way. The color panel is what's next. So this is where you might want to adjust your white balance. So if your image is too warm or too cool, or if you want to change that, you can do that there. Tint is usually like green or red or green or pink tints. And then the next two are vibrance and saturation. So saturation is a global saturation, so it makes everything in your image more saturated or less saturated depending on where you go. And then vibrance. The difference between vibrance and saturation is that vibrance only targets, it's meant to target non-skin tones, so it adds saturation, but it targets the non-yellow and orange tones in your image. Below that is the color mixer, and again, these little buttons here are the hidden buttons, so the color mixer is visible now, but especially if you're working on mobile, those extra tools might not be visible, so you have to click to reveal them. So see right now, this is the basic color panel. When I click this little circle, it will reveal the color mixer. And the color mixer I really like. Let me see if I find an image here that would benefit. Try this image because it's pretty colorful. So in the color mixer, basically, you can adjust your color, hue, saturation, and luminance. So sometimes you'll hear these referred to as HSL sliders. But what I want to do is let's do hue, and let's see what happens. I can literally move the sliders based on the color channels if I know what I want, but say what I want is basically to change the green hue in my image. I can click on this target here. This is called the Targeted Adjustment tool. And basically, if I click on that tool, I can adjust the one color that I'm clicking on. So I'm going to find a green spot to click on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and hold and drag up or down. I'll actually go both ways so you can see. So I've selected green. If I go up, actually I'm sliding up, but it's, well, I guess on the computer it goes left, right. On the phone it goes up, down. So see how my greens are changing? They're becoming they're still green. They are getting more saturated, but really what I'm changing is the hue. So they're more sort of yellow, red here. Weird green, blue here. So one way, that's a really great tool for like, I'm out in the wild and I have some grass, but it's maybe not as green as I want it to be, or these flowers aren't as saturated as I want it to be, or it's too distracting. Like somebody's standing in a photo in the background of your beautiful image and they're wearing a red t-shirt that stands out. You can just go and say, I want to target saturation instead of hue. I can click this bottom button and say, let's lower some of the reds. So if I lower that, I can basically get rid of the red tones in my image, which is really cool. Or I can do something like, I don't know how, I don't know, let's make the green. Let's make the green a little, it's kind of a green yellow. So you can do some really interesting color shifts using those tools. That's here under the color mixer, targeted adjustment tool. One thing that's important to remember is that when you're done, you have to click off of it to stop the tool, to turn off the tool. So I'm going to close that color panel. I'm going to also reset this to the original because that was kind of weird to look at. And then the next panel below light and color is effects. So you get your texture slider. So the texture slider is pretty new. We introduced it in May, and it's the first new slider that we introduced into Lightroom in like a couple of years, I think. So it was kind of big news when we came out with it. But texture is, because it's so new, I'm not great at explaining it. It's adjusting something very technical, engineering term-wise, but it's bringing out very specific. I wish I could remember the term for it. I'm sorry that I don't. But it adds it almost like you can kind of see that if I take it negative, it smooths. And if I take it positive, it kind of makes it a little bit sharper. It's not sharpness, for sure. So the way that it works, let me see if I have a photo of a Good photo of a person. So one good way to explain it is that you can take selfies of me. I don't want to use my face as a demo, but let's do it. Let's do it, but let's zoom in on somebody else's face. Okay. So with the texture slider, what we're doing, if we take it negative, so it can be really great on skin because it'll smooth skin without losing detail. So what it's doing is it's not finding the places, it's avoiding all the places where there's a lot of detail, like your eyes, eyelashes, eyebrows, hair, your mouth, your lips, your teeth. It's targeting places that have nothing, like your cheeks. And that's the technical term, I can't remember it right now. But if you take it negative, it basically, see how it's smoothing the skin of these, I can go extreme so you can see it. So it's smoothing the skin of these people without blurring their eyes as well. So it's a very specific texture that it's either softening or adding detail to. I'm scared to do this because I feel that these are my friends, I don't want to make them look bad, but you really necessarily want to bring up texture on skin unless you want to bring out details. So there might be examples of people who like if you want to bring out an older person's wrinkles and convert this like beautiful portrait to black and white and bring out some texture in their skin to just show their age and wisdom, and it could be beautiful. That's when you might want to take texture up. You might want to take it up on like details like textures like brick or cement or something like that, where you just want to bring out a little bit more of the patterns. So clarity is different. Clarity is, let's go to a different photo. Clarity is essentially adjusting your mid-tone contrast. So mid-tone contrast, the resulting effect is that it looks a little bit like you've added sharpness to your image without sharpening, because sharpening can get really crunchy. Clarity just adds a little bit of mid-tone contrast so that your edges become a little bit more defined. So let's see. So maybe the windows of the building might be a good example. So if I increase my clarity, do you see how the building, it was a little bit soft, but if I increase the clarity, it brings out the lines of the building, just like make it more visible, a little bit sharper. Again, you don't really want to add clarity on skin because it can look, it can make your person's skin look not so good. Taking clarity down adds almost like a slight glow, so like Gaussian blur, if you're used to that tool in Photoshop, is similar. But that's clarity. Dehaze kind of, it's meant to, named after, like cutting the haze. If you're shooting out of an airplane window, it can be very hazy with the atmospheric layers. So you can sort of add a bit of contrast to your image with the dehaze tool, or vice versa. Make it a little cloudy looking. Vignetting is just kind of pulling in from the edges, either a bright or a dark vignette. And you should be able to adjust your midpoint roundness and feathering as well. So how much do you want to be adjusted, or how and how specifically you want to adjust that vignette, right? You can get very specific. Reset that, and then grain, kind of the same. I really encourage you guys, sometimes it's hard to see, so you want to zoom in, see what it does. It just adds a little bit of, grain is kind of popular these days with photo editing because it kind of mimics that film look, so you can do that there. Again, another hidden tool within effects is split toning. So essentially when you are split toning, you are adjusting your shadow and highlight tones. So you'll see split toning a lot with like a cross-processing effect. So a common one is to take your shadows, make your shadows cool, and then make your highlights warm. Then This is intense. You can get some really cool effects, but if at any point you want to play with color, this is where you might do it. And then you just kind of drag these little dots around to control how much. So just like a subtle cross-processing look like that. So in Lightroom, if you're on the desktop, the little backslash key shows you the before, shows you the original, so original versus now. So let's do, let me give you, I'm going to add some contrast and some brightness, just so you can kind of see where I'm coming from. So this was before, and then I let go of this backslash key, and that's after. So those are those main effects. Oops. Detail panel is next underneath here. This is where you might want to do your sharpening. Again, I caution you against using too much sharpening because your image can get crunchy really quickly. So, at most you might want to take it up to 20 or so, but really it totally depends on your image and what your output is. One important thing to remember about Lightroom is just because the sliders are there doesn't mean you have to use them. So I almost never use sharpening because I get the results I need, especially for a web output, using clarity and dehaze and those types of tools. Sharpening is highly recommended for printing above everything else. So if you're not printing, think about whether or not you actually do need sharpening. There's also noise reduction here. So that's there's regular noise reduction and then color noise reduction. So you can get two different types of noise. So if you're shooting a digital camera at a high ISO, you're probably familiar with the fact that you get a lot of digital noise. So you might want to take the noise reduction down. Let's see, even I do have this nighttime image, so we can see an iPhone image. It's a little hard to see the noise. It's almost too dark, but I don't know if I have. This is a tattoo artist, so let's see. Let's use our faces as demo. So let's see. Can't see too much noise, honestly, but again, you don't want to take your sliders too far. This kind of smooths things out. So maybe before, after. So it's very subtle. You can almost barely see it. Probably you guys can't even see it at all on your end. And then color noise reduction is a different type of noise that you might see. I don't really see color noise right now, but it doesn't target. Oh, because I'm on the original. I don't really see color noise, so you're probably not going to see any change here, but sometimes you'll get, at really high ISOs, you'll get little green flecks that are essentially noise, color noise. So if you pull this down, it'll kind of take that down a little bit. But again, don't go too far, because when you use noise reduction too far, it looks cartoony. Then you can adjust with these detail and contrast or detail and smoothness tools. You can get very specific about how you want your noise reduction to work. So feel free again to play around with those. Below that, we have options for removing chromatic aberration. So there might be some here. You see a lot of chromatic aberration oftentimes along the edges where there's a lot of high contrast light, like color. I don't know if we can see it. I don't see. There's a little bit of fringing here on these trees. So we can try the default remove. Sometimes it's nice to just check these defaults anyway. All the lens profiles are built in. So you can see this was taken with an iPhone XS Max back camera. So once I clicked on that, it already applies this sort of distortion, minor distortion correction based on the camera profile that's already in Lightroom. But let's see if we can. Let's see if we can get rid of some of the very slight blue fringing here. Right now, it looks like the default is set to purple because that's the most common chromatic aberration color. So essentially, when I slide this, it should be cutting the fringing, but this is blue fringing, so we might have to shift it. Oh, I don't know. Let's see if it kind of requires a little bit more. Actually, yeah, that's helping. you'll see I shifted it more towards the blue, and I'm taking the defringe down, so I've lost a good amount of that blue fringing right on those trees back there. That's what you'll get with defringe. Below that are the geometry tools. And the geometry tools are really cool. They're really great for people who are focusing on images that are really where there's architecture involved. So oftentimes when you shoot architecture, you want your lines to be straight or as straight as possible. I'm trying to think. So the lines are fairly straight here. I tried to photograph this straight, as straight as I could, but you'll see on the edges, right, that these lines are technically a little bit crooked. So it's a pretty good example, but usually, like if you're standing on a street and staring at a building, looking up at it, because it's taller than you, your photo it'll be distorted in your photo. So the geometry tools are really great for fixing that distortion. So you might want to come in here. There are some auto tools that you can apply. Auto tools are here. You can do auto if you want level, vertical, full. So click on them, see what they do. I like to have control over them. So I usually do the sliders manually. You'll want to check Constrain Crop because, let me show you actually. Say you're fixing your vertical distortion. So when I slide that vertical slider, it basically smushes one end of the image because I'm basically moving my panel this way or my plane of focus this way. So if I don't click Constrain Crop, when I'm done, I'm going to have this like white border that obviously I don't want in my image. But if I hit Constrain Crop, it'll basically auto crop it so that I don't have any of that white edge, right? So I'm going to unclick it right now and then actually reset that to 0. So, okay. So the way that I would use this tool, geometry, is by clicking Constrain Crop. And I like to have a little bit more control. I don't feel like I have that control with the slider, so I usually use the keys themselves, the arrow keys. And I go, oh, that might be too extreme. So right now on 0, I know that I basically clicked up and down, but it moves in Lightroom in increments of 10, which I don't want, right? 10 is too much. It's already gone too far. So my lines are even more crooked than they were. But I know I want to go positive. So what I might do is say, type in an actual value like 3, then hit return. Maybe I'll try 4. And what I'm doing is just looking at, I'm referencing these lines along the corners to see if they're straight and adjusting that that plane of focus. So I can adjust vertical, I can adjust horizontal plane, I can rotate, straighten, that's really handy. I can change my aspect ratio. So if you have an image, like a certain image fits on Instagram in a specific aspect ratio, if you need to shrink it or stretch it, you can do that here. You can change your scale, so basically zoom in or zoom out. And then you can do this like weird XY, sorry, I need to zoom out. So the X offset is sliding it on the canvas. The Y offset is sliding it in the other. Play with it. Again, I really encourage you guys to all play with these tools to see what they can do. Crop tool is here, very straightforward. Crop, rotate, flip if you need it. There's the healing brush below it, so let me just demo that really quickly. There are these images. This is a really great example of an image that could use a healing tool. See this? There's a little bit of a light flare, but really what concerns me is this circle flare, because that's really distracting. So I might want to go into my healing brush here. By swiping up on my trackpad, or using your mouse or whatever, or the size slider up here, you can make that bigger and basically click on it, and it gets rid of whatever it is you want to get rid of. So it's great for like pieces of trash on the floor or blemishes on somebody's face, for example. The difference between healing and cloning is that healing tries to do it in a very soft way and blends your source spot with your destination spot. So what I mean by that is basically the original spot I wanted to get rid of is here. So that's the destination because it's sourcing from here and basically plopping that source onto the destination. So healing merges those very nicely, whereas cloning makes an exact copy, so it kind of like stamps it. So if I was to, you can also move your source. So you'll see that it's just blending wherever I put this source. So say like this actually works pretty well. It blends it nicely when I'm on heal. But see what happens if I hit clone. And then cloning doesn't have that nice blend, so you don't want to do that if you're basically trying to get rid of a blemish or something. I'll keep it on heal. Cloning is great for literally cloning, like if you want to make duplicates of something, so you can use that. And then brush. These last three tools here, let me show you really quickly before we move on. I just want to zoom out. So brush, linear gradient, and radial gradient, these last three tools here basically allow you to do selective adjustments on an image. So I showed you really quickly earlier the linear gradient, which allowed me to brighten one corner and darken another corner, or vice versa. Brush is literally like you get to choose how big your brush is, and you can brush anywhere on the image to brighten it or darken it or make any of these adjustments. These are the tools that are available for you when you're doing your. So there's a whole bunch. So right now it's just set to, this is where I brushed, right? It makes it brighter, makes it darker just based on where I've put that brush. Oh, sorry, just to show you what it's doing. And then I'm going to reset that so we don't have that. Linear, like I showed you earlier, you just pull in from the sides. Right now the exposure is set to -2.8, which is why it's going so dark. Is it? Or I can do a radial gradient. So this is really good for like somebody's face or eyes or something like that. And then you can always move it. You can change the gradient and all that stuff. So just in a really quick nutshell, that's what those tools do, and that's basically what Lightroom has to offer. And remember that when you're done, you should export the image using that icon on the right, save to, and save it to wherever you'd like. And then the last thing is the sharing functionality. So you can basically share to the web or share with specific people so they can collaborate on different albums and add their own images to an album also. So if you have an event, for example, and there are 10 people there, and you want each of them to be able to contribute photos from that event, you can have them share an album with them, and I'll have them act as contributors so they can add images in. That functionality is new as well, normally. Yeah, that's about it. So thanks for sticking around.